Okay, so I'm back again to do a first impressions video on the finale of Doctor Who Season 1, The Empire of Death, or Empire of Death I should say. Once again, this is going to be unscripted like the last one. It's just going to be my free-flowing thoughts on the episode, but this time there is a lot more time in between when I first watched the episode to when I'm recording it at the moment, because I actually watched this one at the cinema at midnight last night. It's the first episode of this season that I've watched at midnight. All the other ones I've watched when I woke up in the morning, but I decided I really wanted to go and see this one at the cinema to have that experience because it's something I've never done before for Doctor Who. I never got around to doing it for the 50th anniversary specials and stuff like that, so that was a fun experience. It was really good to watch it on the big screen as well as the first part of the finale, and yeah, it was a very nice experience. We got a special message from Millie Gibson before it played. One weird thing, and I think this is the same for pretty much everybody that went to the cinema screenings, there was a 15-minute interval in between, which I was expecting, but it did mean that the episode started like 5 or 10 minutes later than it would have dropped on iPlayer for other people. But it's not really a problem because it's not like in that time I was going to go on my phone and somebody was going to skip to the end and put spoilers on Twitter or something like that. So it's not the end of the world, but it was a little bit interesting and it seems most people had that similar experience. But yeah, overall, watching it in the cinema was a very fun experience, and that's the only time I've watched it as of recording this video. So it was quite a few hours ago for me now. But I also think that might have made my viewing of this episode and my opinion of this episode a lot higher than it was, because I actually came out of this episode quite enjoying it. I didn't love it, but overall I had a really good time watching it, and I'm wondering if part of that is because I watched it at the cinema, because I know a lot of people aren't too happy with this episode and some things in this episode, and most of the stuff that I've seen people say I do actually agree with, but I just personally still quite enjoyed this episode. It didn't stick the landing as much as I wanted it to, but I still had a really fun time with it. But I'm going to be rewatching it at some point. By the time this video's gone out, I will have already rewatched the episode, so we'll see how my opinion of that changes when I get to the full in-depth review for this episode. But overall, I really enjoyed it. It wasn't the best thing ever, but I had a fun time. So to begin with, before going into this episode, I was anticipating and expecting there to unfortunately be some sort of reset button because of how high the stakes were and because of Russell T Davies' finales in the past. It was something that I was definitely anticipating, and my fears of that kind of grew even more when in the first 5 or so minutes of the episode, pretty much everybody we care about besides the Doctor, Ruby and Mel all get wiped out by Sutekh. There was a slight second where when Kate got wiped out by the dust, I was thinking, okay, she's going to come back at the end of the episode, but in the back of my mind I was kind of like, okay, is this it for Kate Stewart actually? Because the speech she gave and the moment itself was actually really good, so I was sort of thinking, oh, maybe this actually could be it for Kate, but also still thought there's probably going to be reset at the end. And then as soon as, you know, Carla and Cherry and Mrs. Flood all got wiped out as well, I was kind of like, oh, okay, we are definitely going to get a reset button at the end of this episode, which I was already anticipating before the episode began, to be honest. And it is a little bit unfortunate, but I'll get more onto that when I get to the end of the episode. As for Sutekh in this episode, he wasn't in it a whole lot, which is a little bit disappointing, because after the reveal at the end of the first part, I was excited to see Sutekh. Like I said in my first impressions last week, I was hoping that we'd get a classic Sutekh design, but after seeing the Tales of the TARDIS episode with Pyramids of Mars, I realised that probably wasn't a possibility. It probably wasn't going to happen, because they basically said that Sutekh had evolved, which they also restated in this episode. So it's a bit disappointing we didn't get to see that, but at the same time, after watching this episode, I actually don't really mind, because I kind of liked the way he was in this episode, especially the fact that he was just leaning on the TARDIS like it was nothing, and he was just, there was moments where he like span it around and stuff like that. I thought that was really interesting, but it still would have maybe been nice to see a classic Sutekh design in this episode, at least just for like a brief moment. But yeah, he's also just really not in this episode a whole lot. He's there at the start. I love the moment at the start in Unit before everything kind of goes to shit. Then we kind of see him intermittently throughout, and then obviously at the end. But the middle of the episode, I'm not too sure how I feel about it, because I don't mind that we kind of get a space to breathe for a little bit, a little chance to breathe when they're in the memory TARDIS and stuff like that, but it does start to get a bit boring for a high stakes finale, and I just wish there was more of a sense of getting to see the devastation of what Sutekh has caused and the kind of desolate planets and stuff like that. But we don't really get much of that. We just kind of get one moment where they're in some tent where we don't really get to see the outside world and what it looks like and the desolation surrounding them. And we get the moment in like the city hall or whatever where Roger Ap Gwilliam was working to try and get the DNA test and stuff like that. So I do kind of wish we got to see more of that instead of them just sitting in the memory TARDIS for a lot of it. So I think the best parts of this episode are the start of the episode and the end of the episode, although there is still some issues with the end of the episode, which I will get to. So getting on to the way they basically defeated Sutekh, I don't mind parts of it. I know a lot of people people aren't happy with the fact that the Doctor and Ruby basically just get Sutekh on a lead and just drag him through the time vortex. I don't mind it too much because it's kind of set up with the intelligent gloves and the intelligent rope, which we've kind of already got set up all the way back in Church on Ruby Road. And it also leads to some really good visuals that I actually really liked, where they're dragging Sutekh through the time vortex. And I love the shots where he's kind of like clawing at the time vortex and it's kind of revealing where they are behind it and stuff like that. I thought that was some really good visual effects shots there. And I also like seeing the visual effects shots of Ncuti at the TARDIS doors shouting at Sutekh as it's traveling through the time vortex. I think that looked really good, but I can definitely see why that defeat of Sutekh is a little bit disappointing for some people, especially like I said at the start of this video, the whole reset button where the Doctor basically just brings everybody back to life, which, like I said, I was expecting after everybody got wiped out at the start. It is a little bit of a cop-out. It does kind of make some sense, because if you bring death to death, I guess that kind of makes life in a way, which is kind of the explanation they give, but it does feel a little bit unsatisfying and a bit of a cop-out. But like I said, I really liked the visuals of that moment, so it definitely helps it a little bit, and it's a nice action-packed moment for what should have been a really big blockbuster finale episode. So yeah, like I said, I quite enjoyed that moment, but I can see why some people don't like that resolution, and for me personally, the reset button I'm not a big fan of, even though I knew it was coming and I was kind of anticipating it a little bit. As for the reveal with Ruby and who her parents were, I was really worried that Ruby was going to be revealed to be somebody really special and some kind of godlike entity and stuff like that. So I personally like the reveal and was hoping for the reveal where Ruby was going to basically be a nobody, because to me it reminded me of Star Wars The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker, which I really liked the reveal of Rey in The Last Jedi being revealed to be a nobody. I think it worked really well for that film, and I think it was a really great reveal for the franchise, and it was really disappointing when in Rise of Skywalker they revealed that she was a Palpatine. And so I'm glad they basically did the good version of that and stuck to it in Doctor Who, unless they obviously reverse it in the future, but I doubt it, because Russell actually said in the commentary for this episode that he was actually inspired by that because he didn't like that they went back on that decision in the next film. So I'm assuming he's not going to go back on that decision, and I'm glad that he revealed it that way and revealed it to be that. Although I liked that reveal personally, it does bring up more questions which don't really get answered in the episode, because there's obviously the whole theme of when Ruby's remembering those memories, it kind of starts snowing around her wherever she is, and now that it's been revealed that it's an ordinary person that's her mum, that starts to make a bit less sense, and I don't think that's going to be explained in the future. I feel like it's maybe meant to be explained by some of the supernatural elements that are in the story or something like that, or that have been present in this season, but we don't really get an explanation for that, and it does make a lot less sense after the reveal. And then there's also the whole reveal as well where she wasn't actually pointing at the Doctor, she was pointing at the lamppost, which is actually the signpost of Ruby Road, and it's actually her naming Ruby, which it is a nice moment and a nice reveal, but it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, because it's kind of like, why would she be pointing at that when nobody's around to see it, nobody's going to know? I don't know if it's maybe meant to be implied that it was for the CCTV and she knew there was CCTV or something like that, but even then, in the CCTV, you're not really going to be able to spot that, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And also the stuff with the Doctor and Ruby's memory of that moment changing, that kind of doesn't make sense either, because she didn't initially point. So it does kind of bring up a lot of questions like that with this reveal. But like I said, ultimately I am a big fan of the reveal of Ruby's mum not being somebody special. And I also really liked the final moments with the Doctor and Ruby and her biological mother. I think that's really the heart of the episode and a really nice way to finish off the episode. My only thing is, I did speculate from the last episode that I thought the Doctor was going to go and see Susan and be inspired by the conversation he had with Kate to go and see Susan at the end of this episode. And I almost thought we were going to get that when he mentioned Susan to Ruby, or Ruby mentioned Susan to him, I suppose, when they were in the TARDIS at the end there. And I thought we were about to get that for a moment, and we didn't, which is a little bit disappointing. But the Doctor did still, mention her and say he's inspired by Ruby now to maybe go and find her one day. So maybe they're setting that up to happen in the future, but I just think after setting up all the red herrings with Susan Triad being Susan, it would have been nice to actually go and see her at the end of the episode, even if it wasn't connected to the whole Sutekh thing. It would have been nice for the Doctor to have actually been inspired to go and see her at the end of this episode, which he kind of almost is, but it's kind of implied that he's going to do it at a later date. So that's one of my only other issues really with this episode. I'm a lot more positive on this episode than a lot of other people have been, but what me and my friend have said since watching it, the friend that I went to go and watch it with at the cinema, is it's one of those episodes where you really enjoy it in the moment, at least for me and him, but it's one of those where the more you think about it, the kind of lower your opinion of it gets, because you kind of start thinking about all these things that don't really make sense with some of the reveals, and maybe, you know, you're finding some plot holes and stuff when you start to think about it. And so I'm worried that that is going to impact my rewatch of this episode, and when I rewatch it later on, or by the time you're watching this, I will have already rewatched it, and I'm worried that I'm not going to enjoy it as much during that. But overall, I think I've been a bit more positive on this episode than most people, but I certainly understand most of the critiques that other people have had for this episode, and I agree with them. It's just that I personally still had a pretty good time watching it, which, like I said, may have been the cinema experience, and it may not be the same when I rewatch it, but we'll see how it is. And if you want to know my updated thoughts after the rewatch, I will be doing a full in-depth review of this episode alongside Legend of Ruby Sunday, because I didn't get around to doing a full in-depth review for that. So I'm going to do one video covering both parts of the finale, probably within the next week or so, but we'll see, because at the time of recording this, we haven't had a next time trailer for either the Christmas special or season 2, but by the time this video is out, we might have got one, because it depends if we're going to get one at the end of the live broadcast of this episode. I think there's a slight possibility that that could happen, so if that does happen, I will be doing a video breaking down that trailer. So I'm not sure which of those will come first, the full in-depth review or the trailer breakdown, but subscribe if you don't want to miss either of those videos. And if you want to know my thoughts on every episode of Doctor Who Season 1 so far, I'll make sure to have my reviews playlist on screen now.